Welcome to the Suffering Well Lenten pilgrimage. Yes, this pilgrimage is for Lent and it's 2026, but if you've clicked on it at a different time, it will still be lovely to have you join us because you see, this pilgrimage is not at one particular time or in one particular place. As you can see in the picture, some of the people here are medieval and some are modern. So time is not of the essence, nor is this an identifiable port city. It's wherever you happen to be. And the ship you arrive on? It's the easy chair you're sitting in, or the kitchen table, or even your bed. It's wherever you sit to join us day to day. So whenever you're here, and wherever you are, let's look in on St. Francis and our new arrivals, the people you'll be journeying with for the next 2 months. Welcome to the port city. The port is already awake when St. Francis of Assisi arrives. It always is. Even before the sun has fully cleared the hills beyond the city, the harbor hums with life. Ropes creaking, gulls crying overhead, the low voices of sailors calling to one another in languages Francis recognizes only in fragments. Stone piers stretch out into the water like patient hands, worn smooth by centuries of salt and feet and waiting. The city behind him rises in layers, arched doorways, narrow streets climbing upward, balconies hung with drying laundry, potted herbs, and the occasional burst of color from a tiled roof or painted shutter. Bells ring somewhere in the distance, not sharply, but gently, as if reminding the city to breathe. Francis stands near the edge of the dock, barefoot on the cool stone, his habit simple and worn, a walking stick resting easily in his hand. He shades his eyes with one palm and looks out toward the mouth of the harbor. The ships are coming in. He's been here since early morning, not because he has to be, but because he wants to be. There is a particular kind of joy in waiting for people who are arriving not by accident, but by invitation. Pilgrims, all of them. And though they come from a time far beyond this city, beyond anything Francis could ever have imagined, they are pilgrims nonetheless. The sign beside him sways slightly in the breeze. Lenten pilgrims, meet here. It's written plainly, without flourish. Francis smiles every time he looks at it. The first ship of the morning eases toward the dock, sails furled, hull darkened by long travel. It's a sturdy vessel, broad-beamed, built to carry people more than cargo. Its timbers creak as it settles into place, ropes thrown and caught, the gangplank lowered with a dull thud. Francis watches faces now. That's what he always watches first. Some people step onto the dock hesitantly, blinking as if the light is brighter here than they expected. Others come down the plank already talking, already laughing, already alive with anticipation. A few pauses, looking around here as if trying to orient themselves, not just to the city, but to the idea that they are really here. Then he sees them. A couple, both well into their 80s, moving together toward the dock with unmistakable purpose. The man walks with a cane, his steps measured but determined. There's a steadiness to him that speaks of long endurance rather than speed. The woman beside him walks upright, energetic, eyes bright, scanning the harbor as if she wants to take it all in at once. They're smiling, wide open smiles, the kind that seem to say they've never met a stranger they didn't expect to become a friend. They spot the sign almost immediately. The woman nudges the man lightly, pointing. "That must be it," she says, her voice carrying clearly across the stone. Francis steps forward and then notices the English bulldog. "Peace and good," he says warmly and pats the dog. They both laugh at once, delighted. "Well," the man says, tapping his cane once against the stone, "we knew we were in the right place when we saw that sign." Francis bows his head slightly, smiling. "You're very welcome," he says. "You've come a long way. And who is this that's with you?" The woman looks at him, looks down at the dog, and says, "This is Pearl. She goes everywhere with us." "That's wonderful," says Francis, patting her again. He loves animals. The woman reaches out to clasp Francis's hands. We'd do this trip again in a heartbeat. They introduce themselves then, Harriman and Joyce. They tell him they're Americans, Christians who love the Lord, Protestants, both of them, and unapologetically so, but with the kind of devotion that carries humility rather than defensiveness. He was a CPA by profession, though his life's work has revolved around ministry, serving churches, missionaries, and organizations dedicated to the gospel. For years, he worked at the home office of a mission agency founded by a former missionary to China. She was a homemaker for many years, then a medical assistant for a time, but for decades now her calling has been prayer, prayer walking especially, across cities and towns, streets and highways, quietly interceding for people she would never meet. Francis listens more than he speaks. That's one of the things he's learned to do well. You'll be staying nearby, he tells them once they've caught their breath. Comfortable but simple. Enough rest, enough quiet. We're preparing for a long walk. The Mad nods approvingly. That sounds just right. Francis gives them directions, where to find their lodging, where to eat later in the evening. I'll meet you for supper near sunset, he says. Until then, feel free to wander. Let the city greet you. Thank him warmly, and as they walk away together, his cane tapping steadily, her arm occasionally brushing his, Francis watches them go with something like gratitude. Another group disembarks from the same ship. 3 young adults this time, close in age, close in spirit. They speak with lilting accents, laughter punctuating their words even as they haul their packs onto their shoulders. They're from Ireland, lifelong friends, they explain, raised together in the same parish and shaped by the same rhythms of Mass and family and faith. Francis greets them, and they cross themselves instinctively before shaking his hand. They're curious, eager, a little nervous. This isn't quite like anything we've done before, one of them admits. Francis smiles. That's often how pilgrimages begin. They linger longer than they meant to, asking questions about the city, about the road ahead, about who else might be joining. He answers simply, gently, never saying more than is needed. Soon after, 2 women approach him together. They're from Italy, middle-aged, long-time friends. One speaks quickly, animated, her hands punctuating every sentence. The other listens more than she speaks, but when she does, her words are thoughtful, measured. Both have eyes that suggest they've lived long enough to know joy and sorrow in equal measure. They, too, are welcomed. By the time the sun begins its slow descent toward the horizon, Francis's small gathering has grown into something like a family. They meet that evening in a pub just off one of the main streets, a low-ceilinged place with rough wooden tables, the smell of bread and stew thick in the air. Candles flicker against stone walls, and the murmur of conversation wraps around them like a blanket. They eat simply. Dark bread, a hearty stew of lentils and vegetables seasoned with herbs grown on the hills above the city, cheese fresh and sharp, water, and for some, a small cup of wine. Once the food is placed, Francis bows his head and invites the others to do the same. His prayer is not long nor ornate. He thanks God for the hands that grew the grain and stirred the pot, for the earth and the rain, for the journey that brought each person to this table, and for the companionship now forming among them. He asks that this meal strengthen their bodies for the road ahead and soften their hearts toward God and one another. There is a quiet sincerity in his words, the kind that feels less like a formal prayer and more like gratitude spoken aloud. When he finishes, he simply says, "Peace and good," and the pilgrims echo it softly before reaching for the bread. As the bowls are set down and the first pieces of bread are passed, there's a strange, almost shy pause, the kind that comes when strangers realize they're no longer strangers for long. Francis breaks it gently. "Before we eat," he says, "perhaps we should know one another's names." The woman seated nearest him smiles broadly and turns to the group. "I'm Joyce," she says, her voice warm and confident, "and this is my husband, Harriman." Harriman lifts one hand slightly in greeting, his other resting on his cane. "We're from the States," he adds. "We've been married a long time, long enough to know that if you're going to walk any road together, you'd better do it with faith and a sense of humor. Joyce laughs, and good walking shoes, though I see not everyone wears them. Francis grins, but says nothing. Across the table, the three young adults exchange glances, and one of them speaks first. I'm Sean, he says, gesturing to the others, and this is Aoife. She's been correcting my theology since we were 12. And this is Liam. Aoife rolls her eyes affectionately. Someone had to. They explain that they're from Ireland, from the same parish, the same streets, the same long line of family dinners and Sunday masses. They've known each other nearly all their lives, and though they're still young, there's a steadiness to them, the kind that comes from shared faith tested quietly over time. We thought, Liam says, a little hesitantly, that if we were ever going to do something like this, it made sense to do it together. From the far end of the table, one of the Italian women leans forward. I'm Lucia, she says, her accent musical, her hands already moving as she speaks, and this is my friend Maria. Maria nods, smiling softly. We're from the north of Italy. We've known each other since university. Different lives, same questions. Lucia laughs, and the same stubbornness. They talk easily now about where they're from, what drew them here, what they left behind to make the journey. Joyce asks questions the way people who've raised families often do, with genuine curiosity and no impatience. Harriman listens closely, occasionally adding a thoughtful comment that quiets the table for a moment. At one point, Sean looks at Francis and says, half joking, half serious, "So, do you always eat like this before a long journey?" Francis smiles. It's good food, he says, enough to strengthen, not enough to weigh you down. Joyce nods. That sounds like good theology. Laughter ripples around the table and something settles among them. Not certainty, not clarity, but belonging. For the first time that evening, they are no longer simply travelers who arrived on the same ship. They are pilgrims, together. As they eat, Francis speaks about the days ahead. Until Ash Wednesday, he explains, this time is for preparation, learning to feed on God's Word, learning to breathe prayerfully, learning to walk lightly. There will be scripture each day, prayer each day, small practices, not burdensome ones, that help them discern what they might lay down for Lent and what they might take up in its place. He speaks of prayer, of almsgiving, of fasting, not as punishment, but as training, as readiness. They ask him about himself. Francis tells them just enough, that he once chased after many things, that he learned slowly to let it go, that joy came not from having less, but from needing less, that walking with others has always taught him more than walking alone. He never tells his own story as something extraordinary, only as something received. After supper, they walk back together through the city streets, lantern light glinting off stone. The harbor is quieter now, ships settled into rest, the day's arrivals complete. At their lodging, a modest place, clean and calm, Francis pauses. Rest well, he tells them. We rise before sunshine tomorrow. There are smiles, a few groans, laughter. Before they part for the night, Francis pauses beneath the lantern light outside the inn and asks them to gather close. One by one, he looks at each pilgrim, not quickly, not in passing, but with a quiet attentiveness that makes them feel fully seen. He lifts his hand and offers a simple blessing, calling down God's peace upon their rest, strength for their bodies, clarity for their minds, and courage for the days ahead. He blesses their walking and their waiting, their speaking and their silence, their questions as much as their faith. When he finishes, there is no dramatic gesture, only a gentle nod and a soft peace and good, as each pilgrim receives the blessing in their own way before turning toward the door. All the others have gone inside, and the courtyard has grown still. Francis remains for a moment where he is. He lowers his head and rests both hands on his walking stick, his bare feet planted on the cool stone. He does not speak loudly, nor with any sense of formality, only as one friend speaking to another. He thanks God for each pilgrim by name, for their willingness to come, for the trust already beginning to form among them. He asks for wisdom to guide without pride, for patience to walk at the pace of the slowest, and for love enough to recognize Christ in every face along the road. Finally, he entrusts the journey itself to God, knowing it will unfold in ways none of them can yet see. When he lifts his head again, there is peace there and readiness. Then he turns and goes inside. Francis lingers a moment longer in the courtyard, barefoot on the cooling stone, looking up at the darkening sky. The pilgrimage has begun, not with walking, but with welcome.